Bailouts is still a dirty word in America right now, even if President Obama's former car czar still doesn't get it. In his new book, Overhaul, Steve Rattner says he's mystified at why members of Congress were so concerned about the mandated closing of dealerships in their districts. He's also critical of the dealership owners who vocally opposed the closings and the manner in which they were conducted. Now, one dealer Rattner specifically targets in his book is a guy named Jack Fitzgerald. Now, he is a Maryland-based businessman who fought the closings tooth and nail, but Jack is here to set the record straight and to challenge Mr. Rattner to come clean. Jack Fitzgerald, great to see you again. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. Let's be absolutely clear about what was said about you in Mr. Rattner's book. And let's put the quote up if we can. Here is what Rattner's book says about you. He said, when we asked GM and Chrysler to fill us in, we learned that the franchises more than deserve to be closed. Fitzgerald, speaking of you, for example, had sold only around 3 new Chryslers in 2008. Is that true?
No, of course not.
You say of course not, but you got to be specific. How many Chryslers did you sell in 2008?
It was less than 1,000, but it was close to 1,000. I didn't know you were going to ask me that. I should have looked it up.
Close to 1,000. So he says 3. How do you think he could have come out with getting something so wrong and putting it in a book?
Well, he makes up the facts as he goes along. He doesn't care. He wouldn't know the truth if it jumped up and hit him in the face.
Well, in fact,
he's a car czar, and that's exactly what he is. He's a czar. A czar takes no prisoners. A czar answers to no one. A czar simply makes the world the shape that he wants it to be in. That's what he did. And he did his boss a great disservice, too.
What do you think? What do you think the whole episode of the auto bailout says to America about government involvement when government gets this intrusive into the private sector?
Well, this was an extraordinary situation, but the very least the government can do is to hire people that have some experience in the business, whatever the business is they're going to regulate or involve themselves in. There was no one on the task force that had ever made a car or sold a car. No one. And they wouldn't listen to any of us that tried to talk to them.
Well, you know, that's the extraordinary thing. And frankly, it's still happening now. The fact that very often this administration will make decisions that affect thousands of businesses all over America, millions of people, without talking to the business people that will be directly affected. Did you ever try to contact Steve Rattner and say, you're making a mistake here or there?
Oh, yeah, and I can document it, too. I sent him a lot of stuff, sent him emails, had telephone conference calls with his people. I spoke personally with Mr. Deese, for example.
Tell us who Mr. Deese is again, sir.
Mr. Deese is the young man that was the liaison from the White House to the task force. He's 31 years old, drives a Honda with 150,000 miles on it, and says to me, why do you sell Chryslers? Well, I sell Chryslers because I had 40,000 customers in Maryland and D.C. and Virginia that bought them from me over the years, and I'm not going to walk away from my customers. Sure, I sell a lot of other brands. But the way you stay in business is taking care of your customers. They put more people out of work across the country than they saved in Detroit, and that's what got Congress upset. Nobody talks about that. They didn't save any jobs in the retail sector. They needlessly put people out of work. They needlessly closed businesses. And Detroit, you know, if they may make it in time, but they don't even have a captive finance company for Chrysler, and the GM board had to go out on their own and defy the task force and buy a captive finance company. And for your information, there hasn't been a successful car company in America in the last 50 years that didn't have its own captive finance company. Yeah. That's just like, you know, English 101, some things you have to do.
But they
Mr.
just
Rattner
weren't
doesn't
listening.
have a clue.
Why do you think it was that they'd go to such a huge effort, spend $80 billion of taxpayers' money in these auto bailouts, affect thousands of businesses, as I said, millions of workers, without getting the solid, down-to-earth, very basic kind of advice and experience that you had?
Well, I have an opinion on that. I can't tell you that I know.
Well, what's your opinion?
My opinion is that they're elitists. And a czar, that's a perfect job for an elitist. An elitist believes that they are innately qualified to do anything and that they know more about everything than anybody else. And I've talked to Mr. Blum. I've never had the privilege of talking to Mr. Rattner. He was busy running from the Attorney General of New York by the time all of this got public. But I've talked to Mr. Blum, and I can tell you that he is the most arrogant person I've ever met in my entire life. And I've been dressed down by drill sergeants, you know. I served my time. And I've never heard anything like him or experienced anything like him. And this is a guy that's supposed to be running our industrial future. He's in charge of industry. He's made a terrible mess of Detroit. They are down, Chrysler is down 25% in retail sales from the worst 12 months in history. Now, they're covering it up with fleet sales.
Well, and 60% of the company is now owned by UAW. By the way, what you say is making extraordinary sense. I think obviously you get it. I think the American people, though, to get it as well, don't you? And I think it'll be reflected in the coming elections.
Well, Mr. Rattner and Mr. Blum have hurt the president. I think the president wanted to do what was right. But two presidents wanted to do what was right, and that's, you know, the mismanaged government had created a subprime disaster in real estate that was taking the finance industry down. And that was going to take, you know, unintended consequences. It was going to hurt legitimate businesses. So they stepped in to do something. That makes some sense. You know,
but what doesn't make sense, Jack, and we got to go, but what doesn't make sense is not listening to the people who know the business. If you're going to interfere in the private sector, you have to listen to the best people in the private sector who could give you advice, and they weren't listening to you. Jack Fitzgerald, Fitzgerald Auto Mall president. Jack, great to see you. Thanks for coming here. Please come back and see us again.
Well, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Coming up on deck,